Okay, let's start with the second session. Today, I'll be discussing about mainly two things. One is mechanics of respiration. After completion of this part, I'll discuss about different types of lung volumes and capacities. So, in the mechanics of respiration, to know about the details of mechanics of respiration, we must know about the different types of pressure involved in the mechanics. It means I'm going to discuss about the different types of pressure that interplay a major role in the respiratory mechanics. So what are the different types of mechanics, or what are the different types of pressure that helps maintain the respiratory process? The mechanics are, the pressures are mainly intra-alveolar pressure or IAP, intrapleural pressure, IPP, and transmural pressure. It is the pressure difference between inside of the lung and outside. So, before discussing about the various type of pressure involved in the respiratory mechanics, we must know about a common rule that is called Boyle's law. That is called Boyle's law. So, according to the Boyle's law, the pressures is proportional to, inversely proportional to a volume, right? So, here in the mechanics process, so we'll see how the Boyle's law played a role in the regulation of respiratory mechanics. So here, this is very common concept about the respiration. As all of us know, respiration is basically two component process: the inspiration and expiration. During inspirations, air moves into the lung. During expiration, air moves out of the lung. What the entry and exit of the air basically depends on the type of pressure involved, basically regulated by alveolar pressure, pleural pressure, and transmural pressure. If you see the characteristics of inspiration, the most important characteristics is inspiration is an active process. It means it involves some form of energy, right? Other than energy, in normal inspiratory process, there is two main muscles are involved. These are diaphragm and external intercostal muscle. But in some cases, we need to inhale. They are forcefully. So during forceful inspiration, other than diaphragm and external intercostal muscle, some other muscles played an important role. These are SCM and scalene. But if you see the characteristics of expiration, it is basically a passive process. And it is due to the collapsing of lung alveoli. Here, no involvement of energy. But if you see the other characteristics, in quiet breathing, in quiet expiration, there is no involvement of any muscle. But for forceful expiration, it involves muscles, mainly abdominal muscles and internal intercostal muscle. Now, as I mentioned, the whole respiratory mechanics fully depends on the pressure. What are the different types of pressures that need to maintain for the gaseous exchange, for the regulations of respiratory mechanics are intra-alveolar pressure. If you see the structures of lung alveoli, this is lung alveoli. The pressure exerted in the inside of the lung alveoli is called intra-alveolar pressure. Right? Here, the outer surface of the lung alveoli is covered by a membrane. Right? The name of this membrane is called visceral pleura, which immediately attaches to the outer surface of the lung alveoli. At the same time, there is another layer that is basically attached to the chest wall. Suppose this is chest wall. So, this layer is attached to the chest wall. This layer is called parietal pleura, right? So, in between visceral and parietal pleura, there is a space. This is called intrapleural space, right? This intrapleural space is filled with some fluid, right? That is called pleural fluid. This pleural fluid is very much essential to perform both the inspiration and expiration. Now we will see how this intra-alveolar pressure and the pressure that is exerted in the pleural space, that is IPP, how both these pressures regulates the respiratory mechanics. At the initial point of time, so called the resting state, if you see the pressures inside the lung alveoli, it is 760 millimeter mercury. At the outside of the lung alveoli, so called atmospheric pressure, it is also 760 millimeter mercury, right? It means at resting state, there is no pressure difference between atmospheric pressure and alveolar pressure. So since there is no pressure difference, now we can say the alveolar pressures at rest is 0 mmHg. Since there is no pressure difference between atmospheric pressure and alveolar pressures at resting state, we can say the resting state alveolar pressure is 0 millimeter mercury. But once inspiration starts, there is changes in the pressure, right? So how the pressure changes at the beginning of inspiration? According to Boyle's law, with the changes of pressure, there is an inverse changes of volume. This is inverse relationship. That is, P is proportional to 1 by V, right? As I mentioned, at the resting state or at rest, the pressure is 0 millimeter mercury inside lung alveoli. At the beginning of inspiration, what is the changes takes place in the lung alveoli structure? There is changes in the volume, right? Initially, it was like this. But at the beginning of inspiration, there is changes in the volume. So if there is a changes in the volume, what will be the pressures during resting condition? It will decline, right? So initially it was 0, right? This is inspiration, expiration. This is the volume of alveoli. Sorry, this is the pressure in y-axis. See, initially, suppose it is 0 mm Hg. At the beginning of the expiration, there is an expansion of volume. So if volume increase, there will be decrease in the pressure. That is minus 1 mmHg, right? It means here at the end of the inspiration, pressure returns back to 0 again. But in the mid inspiration, the pressure is minus 1 millimeter mercury, which is less than the initial pressure. Similarly, if you see the expiration pattern, in this particular state, the level of pressure is 0. During expiration or at the beginning of the expiration, there is a shrinkage of lung alveoli, right? Shrinkage of lung alveoli leads to increase in pressure, right? So it moves towards 1. It means at the mid expiration, due to shrinkage of lung alveoli, pressure increases, right? According to Boyle's law, if pressure increase, volume decline, right? So here again, it returns back to the 0 millimeter mercury. It means, though it was 0 at the beginning of expiration, due to shrinkage of the lung alveoli, there is an increase of pressure inside alveoli. According to the Boyle's law, if there is a increase in pressures, the volume will decline. What? It needs to return back, or it needs to neutralize the pressures in both the atmosphere as well as alveolar pressure. So to neutralize the pressures inside alveoli, here at the end of the expiration, the air moves out from the lung, which ultimately helps to maintain the pressure 0. There is no differences between atmospheric as well as the alveolar pressures at resting state. On the other hand, as I mentioned, there is a very important key point. The pressures at rest, this is 0 millimeter mercury. End of inspiration, this is end of inspiration. Again, pressure is 0 here. And end of expiration, pressure is 0 here. Right? So if you see, the minimum pressure is -1 during inspiration, and maximum pressure is +1 millimeter mercury at the mid of expiration, right? In most of the times, MCQ asked on this point, what will be the pressures during mid inspiration or mid expiration? What will be the pressure at the resting state, right? Now see, intrapleural pressure. As I mentioned, intrapleural pressure is the pressure that is exerted into the pleural space. If you see the pleural space in both the sides or one side, so-called visceral pleura, which is attached to the lung surface, and parietal pleura, which is attached to the chest wall. Both surface creates opposing forces. Both the surface creates opposing forces. Due to that opposing forces, there is a changes in the volume of pleura. Let me show you. Suppose at rest, this is the pleural space. This side is the visceral side, which is attached to the lung surface, and this side is the parietal side, which is attached to the chest wall. At resting state, the pressure is, suppose, 0 mmHg, right? Means, again, there is no pressure difference. But due to opposing forces, there is a changes in the volume of this space, pleural space. Now see, this is the new volume, right? In this condition, the pressure, according to Boyle's law, pressures will fall down, right? Because there is an increase in the volume. So what is the new pressure here? The new pressure is around minus 2.5 millimeter mercury, right? So why? It is only due to the opposing forces that causes changes in the volume, and this is the new volume, right? We have to remember that the intrapleural pressures always maintain a negative pressure, and it is only due to the opposing forces, right? So here you can see the volume of pleural cavity is going to increase. Why? It is only due to alveolar wall is trying to pull in, whereas chest wall is trying to pull out. Now, what will happen during inspiration or expirations, and how these negative pressures maintain in the pleural space? For the generation of negative pressure in pleural space, opposing forces is essential. But to maintain that negative pressure, another important system works here. That is called the lymphatic system. So what is the features of the lymphatic? What is the function of lymphatic system here? The lymphatic system. This is the lymphatic system. To maintain the negative pressures, the lymphatic system sucks sufficient amount of fluid from pleural space that ultimately helps to maintain that negative pressure, which is essential. That is essential because to perform normal inspiratory process, it needs to maintain a sufficient amount of pleural fluid as well as sufficient pressures in the pleural space. Now see, so what is the pressures at normal state in the pleural space? This is minus 2.5 mmHg, right? And it is due to increase in the volume. So according to Boyle's law, if there is an increase in the volume, there will be changes in the pressure. Pressures will fall down. This is around minus 6 mmHg, right? So why pressure changes here? It is changes here just because of the Boyle's law. Now, as I mentioned, in the pleural space, it needs to maintain the negative pressures always. So, means it needs to maintain minus 2.5 millimeter mercury pressure. To maintain that pressure, lymphatic systems will start work and it has to release some of the fluid. That if there is release of fluid from this pleural space, obviously there will be changes in the pressures again. So this is what is the changes of pressure, and these pressures changes actually occurs during the expiration process. So it means the lowest pressure in the pleural space, it is minus 6 mmHg, which starts from 2.5 mmHg, and ultimately after the completion of expiration, it returns back to minus 2.5 mmHg again. Am I clear? Now, not only alveolar pressure and pleural pressure, other than these two pressures, another important pressures also played an important role in respiratory mechanics. That is called transmural pressure. See, what are the important types of transmural pressure and what is the value of each and every different type of transmural pressures and how to calculate the transmural pressure. So, as I mentioned, it actually indicates the pressure difference between inside and outside of the system, which is categorized into three types: transpulmonary, transthoracic, and transrespiratory pressure. Now, let me tell you transpulmonary pressure. Here, transpulmonary pressure is the pressure difference between intra-alveolar pressure, that is this one, and intrapleural pressure, that is the pressure presence in the space. IPA, that is intra-alveolar pressure minus intrapleural pressure. So at rest, we already know, at rest, the intra-alveolar pressure is zero only because there is no pressure difference between atmospheric pressures and inside of alveoli. So it means the IAP here is this one. Where is intrapleural pressure? As I mentioned, this is minus 2.5, which is maintained due to the opposing forces of both the pleura, right? So it is minus 2.5. So what will be the transpulmonary pressure? It will be 2.5 mmHg. Am I clear? Now, see the second one, transthoracic pressure. It is again nothing, it is the pressure difference between the intrapleural pressure and the pressures outside the thorax, that is atmospheric pressures. So we already know about the value of atmospheric pressure, that is 0 mmHg, and you also know about the value of intrapleural pressure, that is minus 2.5. So what will be the overall value? That is minus 2.5. And transrespiratory pressure. Again, here it is the pressure difference between the pressures of alveoli or intra-alveolar pressure and the atmospheric pressure. In both the case, pressure is only 0. In both the case, pressure is 760 mmHg. So, since the pressure is 760 in both the sides, means there is no pressure difference. 0 minus 0, that is 0 mmHg is the transrespiratory pressure. So, during the proper respiratory mechanics, or to complete the proper respiratory function, our respiratory system needs to maintain all these three different type of respiratory pressure across the respiratory system. Now, in some cases, the patient suffers with some medical complications if there is a disturbance in the pleural pressure. A very common clinical features is pneumothorax. So what is the characteristics of pneumothorax? Right? Here, pneumothorax, also known as collapsed lung. The characteristics of this pneumothorax is there is a entry of some air from atmosphere to the intrapleural space, and this entry is mainly due to the collapse of both the visceral layer or visceral pleura as well as the parietal pleura. Due to the collapse of visceral pleura and the parietal pleura, it leaks some amount of air inside the pleural space. So due to the entry of air, it changes the pleural pressure. As I mentioned, pleural pressure always to be maintained in negative, that is minus 2.5. But due to extra leakage or extra amount of air entry leads to changes in the fluid volume of overall volume of the space, which ultimately leads to defective inspiratory process, lungs unable to expand properly. So this is what is the biological or physiological characteristics of pneumothorax. Now see, here in our respiratory system or respiratory process, it maintains proper volume of air, as well as our lung function system has a specific capacity to inhale or exhale of air. So now I'll discuss about what are the different types of lung volume and capacities, and what is the normal lung volume and capacities for healthy subject. Here the total numbers of lung volumes are 4. What are these? These are tidal volume, inspiratory reserve volume, expiratory reserve volume, and residual volume. And let me explain one by one. The tidal volume, that is this part. What is the meaning of tidal volume? It is the volume of air inspired or expired during normal breathing process. And for healthy subject, the maximum amount of tidal volume is only 0.5 liter or 500 ml. Now in some cases, we need to perform forcefully, right? Forceful inhalation and forceful exhalation. So during forceful inhalation and forceful exhalation, specific types of muscle involved that help us to inhale more amount of air inhalation and more amount of air exhalation. Now, what is the meaning of IRV? Inspiratory reserve volume, it is the volume of air inspired during forceful inhalation process, right? So tidal volume is 0.5 liter. What? During forceful inhalation, it changes to, that is, inspiratory reserve volume is around 2.5 liter, right? See this one. This is the normal breathing process, right? Inspiration, expiration, inspiration, expiration. But during forceful inspiration, the muscles helps to inhale more amount of air that leads to changes in the volume here, inspiratory reserve volume. At the same time, in some cases, we need to exhale more amount of air. In that case also, some specific muscles are involved, like abdominal muscles and internal intercostal muscle. So what is the expiratory reserve volume? It is the volume of air exhaled during forceful exhalation after normal tidal volume, right? Here it is around 1.5 liter. Now, another one is the residual volume. The residual volume is the volume of air that remains inside the lung even after completion of the breathing cycle, right? So this is called the residual volume. So this residual volume is also around 1.5 liter. So now, what is the lung capacity? Lung capacity is nothing. It is the sum total of all the volume. So what is the maximum or total lung capacity here? It will be the sum total of all this, right? It is 1, 2, 3, it's around 6 liter. This is the total lung capacity, right? So capacity is the sum total of the lung volume. So what are these volume? These are tidal, inspiratory reserve volume, expiratory reserve volume, then residual volume, and finally which is calculated using formula, the sum total of volume. Now see, here other than total lung capacity, what is the meaning of vital capacity here? So vital capacity or forced vital capacity, it is the volume of air inspired and expired during forceful inspiration and forceful expiration, right? So in normal breathing process, the volume was only 5.5 ml, I mean 0.5 liter. But due to forceful inhalation and forceful exhalation, now the capacity changes. Here IRB was 2.5 and ERB was 1.5. Now, both the IRB and ERB along with the normal tidal volume makes the vital capacity, right? So IRB is 2.5 and ERB is 1.5, that is around, and vital capacity is 0.5, that is 4.5 is the vital capacity, right? Now, next one, FRC and inspiratory capacity. So here you can see inspiratory capacity is the extra volume of air that is expired during forceful inspiration, right? So what is the volume of inspiratory capacity? That is around 3 liter, right? Now, out of all these volume and capacities, how to measure the volume and capacities, whether there is any specific instrument available that help us to record the pressure, record the volume and capacities. Yes, spirometric assessment of lung function, right? Spirometric assessment of lung function. The spirometry, using spirometry, we easily can record the capacity of our lung. All the capacities recorded by spirometric measurement except functional residual capacity. The functional residual capacity, or to calculate the functional residual capacity, we need to calculate manually only. Means, if we have the value of expiratory reserve volume, that is 1.5, and if we have the value of residual volume, this is also 1.5, we easily can calculate the functional residual capacity, which is not possible to estimate using, to record using spirometric measurement, right? So here, for healthy subject, these are the normal range of lung volume and lung capacities. Now question is, whether there is any factors that affects the lung volume and capacities. Yes, there are multiple factors that affect the lung volume and capacities. For example, the lung volume and capacities of an obese subject in comparison to normal healthy subject. For obese subject, it is very difficult to maintain normal lung volume. To maintain the normal lung volume, they need to create more pressure. They need, their muscles needs to create more force so that sufficient amount of air can enter and exit. But if you compare the same thing with the normal healthy subjects, in their case, their volume and capacity is much better than obese subjects. Not only obesity, there are several other factors like ethnicity. If you see the lung function status of ethnic population or ethnic tribes, according to the research, those who are ethnic, their lung function is much better than non-ethnic or non-tribes. Similarly, genetics played an important role in the lung function status of subject, right? So, like this, there are several factors, so-called factors affecting lung function. These factors affect both the static and dynamic lung function. Now, there are several clinical conditions may origin if there is a changes in any of the lung volume or capacities. A very common example, you people already know the term, obstructive lung disease and restrictive lung disease, or chronic obstructive lung disease, COPD, and restrictive lung disease. So what is the characteristics of chronic obstructive lung disease? Obviously, there is an obstruction in the lung airways that prevents the normal passage of air. Ultimately changes the pressure that needs to maintain in the alveoli as well as the pleural space for proper respiration. Another important disease which is very common nowadays, that is irreversible lung damage, that is called silicosis, right? In silicosis also, if you see their lung function status in comparison to healthy subjects, you will find again sharp decline of vital capacity or forced vital capacity. So means These are most important parameters that is used to assess individual lung health. So to know about the individual lung health, we must know about the characteristics of each and every volume and their range, as well as each and every capacities and their range, and how to estimate or how to calculate the volumes, or how to calculate mainly the capacities of our lung. I hope up to this is clear to you people.